The border between New South Wales and Victoria is likely to stay shut for weeks. Police in their hundreds are en route to the border to enforce the rules at 55 major checkpoints. It's the first time in more than a century that the border has been closed between the states. Police are warning travellers of harsh penalties and on-the-spot fines. I spoke to New South Wales Police Minister David Elliott about the new rules just a short time ago. David, this is an evolving story, a story that's unfolding minute by minute, hour by hour. What's the latest on the border from a policing perspective?
Well, as we speak, Peter, we will be deploying up to 650 police down to the Victoria-New South Wales border. They will commence operations from midnight tonight, pretty much, to ensure that that border crossing is no longer free and easy. Unfortunately, the situation in Melbourne with the massive increase in patients of coronavirus has meant that we're going to have to implement the same sort of border restrictions that we've seen overseas and by various governments across Australia. And they'll be supplemented, of course, by the Australian Defence Force. People shouldn't be too scared or fearful of what's going on because these are well-exercised protocols. And,
of course, we've seen in recent days the problem exacerbate in Victoria, and of course we know that your Premier, Gladys Berejiklian, has spoken at length to Dan Andrews down there. It's a sad state of affairs, isn't it, really, when you consider that Australia did so well up until now?
Well, that's exactly right. It is a sad state of affairs, and I think people in Victoria will be very confused as to why this spike occurred. In fact, I think anybody around Australia will be fascinated to find out how this spike really did occur. New South Wales, my view has been implementing world's best practice when it comes to response. I can't see any other jurisdiction, particularly of a similar size or population, that's done anything better than what we've done. So the closure of this border isn't something that Premier Berejiklian's taken lightly. It's something that I think she's been compelled to do, and it's certainly not something that she actually wanted to do.
Minister, harsh penalties for those people who breach the law. What sort of expectations can people have if they do the wrong thing?
Well, I think, Peter, the first thing we need to realise is that these aren't punitive measures that we're taking. These shouldn't be seen as a punishment. This should be seen, this operation, this police military operation should be seen as the New South Wales government's attempt to look after its own citizenry. That's our first obligation as a government. But yeah, if you want to push the envelope, as I've said, there's be a $1,000 on-the-spot fine, there's a custodial sentence, and there's more significant financial penalties in the event that you're convicted of doing the wrong thing. Our appeal is to simply don't think about those penalties, just do the right thing and avoid them.
Now, with these border closures, have we got any time frame at all on how long this will last, or will it be wholly dependent upon how Victoria handles this particular crisis?
Well, I think that is the point. It will come down to how well Victoria handles this crisis. But unfortunately, we're talking weeks rather than days. The Victorian government has, I understand today, has announced that some of these new lockdowns will be for 6 weeks. And I think what you also find in an operation like this, that every day they review and consider what the forward planning should be. But I wouldn't anticipate anybody thinking that before August that there'll be free exposure to border traffic. But I'm the eternal optimist. I'd like to think that the Victorian government will be able to get a handle on this swiftly. But in the event that it's not, people need to be making any future plans based on the fact that we are under this type of movement restriction.
Minister, what would you advise to the people of New South Wales right now if they're contemplating travelling to Victoria, or in fact if they've got friends and relatives who might think about heading north at this time? I mean, it's a life and death situation, really, isn't it?
Well, it can be, and that's what we're trying to avoid. It can be a life and death situation. I mean, nearly 200 new cases today. There was a couple of further tragic deaths in the last 24 hours. I think the first message to New South Welshmen and women is that don't expose yourself unnecessarily to the virus. The second point, of course, is that you really need to consider whether or not travel plans are essential, and there are exemptions, particularly in the abroad economies. People will be encouraged from tonight to seek those exemptions because we don't want to make it unnecessarily burdened, particularly when you consider that Albury-Wodonga is some 400 or 500 kilometres away from Melbourne. But we also want to make sure that everybody realises that their responsibility starts with themselves when it comes to making sure that this pandemic doesn't spread unnecessarily.